alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a returning guest to the podcast, Nicole Fanning. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Tim. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's always great to have you, and we were just talking before the episode started in the secret before times about the length of your books a little bit, because you got Catalyst and Ignite, and those are, I'm not sure what genre you call those, which genre rises to the top there.
So
I just don't remember.
Them, like mystery, suspense, romance. So they're like mafia thrillers, with like the romance aspect to it. But those two books are done, and book 3 is looking to be finished up here very shortly, hopefully by the end of the month.
Excellent.
So we're looking at like an early fall release for that, which is a little bit later than I anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
But this book has probably been the most challenging because originally I wanted it to be 4 books because I'm a dork and I fell in love with the 4 stages of a fire. So like, you have the catalyst, you have the ignition, you have the flashpoint, which is like the hottest point of the fire before it starts to die. And then you have like the embers. And I just loved like those 4 like titles in my head. Mm-hmm. But when I was like going into it, I was like, what I don't want to do is be one of those writers that like, I have a book, but like I'm just writing a bunch of fluff, like miscellaneous fluff to like fill it. And I'm like, so I'll just try to squeeze it all into 3 was like my thought. So I was originally started this with like, I'm just going to do the trilogy, it'll be Catalyst, Ignite, and Flashpoint. But the more I started writing Flashpoint, the more I was running into this problem where, you and I have talked about this in previous shows. I am a plotter, so I've plotted out what I have for the book. I have the whole plot skeleton written for the whole series, and then I had one for the book. And the problem was that as I was writing it, it started to feel like I was getting crunched because I knew where it needed to end. And the character development I have for like one specific character was just not happening like as quickly as I wanted it. And the way I was writing it was like, this is exactly what needs to happen. So I'm like, holy crap, like I have to push this to 4 books. So it was kind of like a last minute decision to push it to 4 books, but it was what I always wanted. But this book has been challenging because like, rearranging some stuff and moving some stuff around and then like expanding on some concepts that when I did the plot skeleton, I really wanted to expand on. I just didn't know if I'd have time. And then as I start writing it, I'm like, no, I really do need to talk about those things and do that. If I want to, like, I feel like I've written 2 good books so far that have like pleased readers and delivered on like that thriller romance, because that's 2 hard genres to hit, like thriller and mafia and romance. And I feel like the first 2 were like, they were home runs, but I'm like, I have to, like, it's hard as a writer because you're like, I have to keep up this standard.
Absolutely.
So, I'm like, I don't want to crunch this and then have people mad at me. So it's just, this book has been a little bit more challenging and it's been pushed back a little bit. And like, I know, I promised fans that it would be out this spring and then, we're getting into summer, but I promise it's all for a good reason. So yeah.
No, that's a very interesting position to be in. But I also think, and I'm very bad about writing the 3rd book in my series. I take forever on the 3rd book usually. I've done 2 third novels that have come out so far, and one that I'm working on.
Right.
And then there's another one that it's not suspended, whatever. I'm like, oh, I want to get to that, but I would keep pushing it back on the old docket because I got too many series. But one thing I noticed when you talk about that is that you've got this, or let me go back to the very beginning where you said, it's just a last minute decision to make it a 4-book series. And then, but you'd always kind of wanted it to be that way. And I think that's really interesting because I feel the same way about a lot of my work, where it's like, I didn't know that I wanted to do it this way, or I didn't know how much I wanted to do it a given way with a given work, or how much it was necessary, how much I was right to begin with,
It's so important, like, to, like, and I've had a lot of, like podcasts where people ask you, like, oh, are you a plotter or a pantser? And I'm like, or, plants are, like, are you somewhere in between? And I'm like, I'm a plotter. But what I do is, like, I have, like, the playground set. Like, my characters, it's kind of like they're in a sandbox. Like, they're in the sandbox. They're not leaving that sandbox. We're not going on too many crazy rabbit trails. But I will let the characters that I think I told you in another podcast that I wrote, before I wrote a single word of the book, I wrote 122 pages of character backstory for both my main two characters as well as, like, the 10 or 15 characters that are the main side characters in the series. And, some of them had like 4 or 5 pages to their story. Some of them had like a 1-pager. But I wrote that out and I saw it in my head. And sometimes, like, when I'm writing for a character, I'm like, this would be a great way to exemplify something I've written about their, like, character backstory.
Right.
And so, like, the character takes me on, like, kind of like a minor detour, but it's a detour, not like, a detour to a cliff where, like,
you
we're
didn't jump the
suddenly lost.
tracks either. Yeah.
Yes. We find our way back. And it ends up, so I feel like you have to, as a writer, be, like, you want it to go somewhere, but at the same time, you have to be able to let your character speak to you too, so that it doesn't seem too like, this is all I'm allowed to do. Yes.
That's what I found. I was so bad about doing that when I tried outlining, because I'm more naturally, of course, a discoverer. But when I outline and then I'm like, well, I got to stick to this outline, that resulted in books that just didn't work. Almost every book that I did like that is like, they just didn't work for me.
Right.
But I think it would be the same way. I just don't have the flexibility to say. I don't usually have this flexibility anyway, to say, like, oh, I'm just going to change this little thing here and I'll go right back to what I was planning to do, or I'll find my way back. I don't trust that. And usually when I diverge, it diverges a lot of material. And so therefore, I give up on trying to plan.
Too. I had one in book 2. I had, like, one scene, and I'm not going to tell readers which one it is. But I had one scene that, like, it was a chapter I wasn't okay, I should explain before I say this. I have ADD really bad. And so for me, I have to have, like when I say an outline or a plot skeleton, what I literally have is I have a notebook piece of paper that has chapter 1 and then the main event that's happening in chapter 1. And then I have chapter 2 and the main event that's happening in chapter 2. Only so that, like, because I'm alternating every other chapter with the perspective that's a first-person perspective for Jackson and Natalie, I'm making sure that the story moves along. And so I've had it where I was in the moment and I was like, because I'll write, like, chapters 1 through 7. And then chapter 8 will have, like, a main plot point that isn't as exciting as the stuff that was in chapters 1 through 7. And I'll be like, I don't really feel like writing that one, but I'm really attached to, like, chapter 22, and I'm seeing that one in my head. So I'm going to go write that today and get that out. And then, I'll eventually, I do always go back and I finish chapter 7 and kind of move on. But I've had it where it's been a rewarding experience, because sometimes that one chapter, that chapter 7 or whatever, and I'm not saying that's the chapter.
Right.
But I'm just saying, like, I've had it where that chapter I was not looking forward to writing ends up taking me on that little adventure, on that little detour, that I'm like, holy crap, like, I'm so glad that this happened. And even if I've had to add another chapter, which, like, again, if chapter 7 is in Natalie's perspective and we're expanding into this little side story, then that means I have to add another Jackson chapter, like, in it to get back to where I need to go. So it's kind of like I have to look at it from that perspective. Like, I know I can't go too far off the rails, because then I have to basically add 2 more chapters for every time, like, I go so far off the rails that I have to explain, what Jackson was doing in that moment, and then go back to Natalie and finish what was happening, and then we can pick up where we were supposed to be. So I've had that happen a couple of times where a detour has added not 1, but 2 chapters to the story. But they were stuff that I was like, oh my God, this was such good material. And I was so grateful for it. And some of those, like, boring chapters that I wasn't looking forward to writing ends up being some of my favorite chapters.
Oh, absolutely. That reminds me a lot of that's a great feeling, and it's really interesting. It does remind me a little bit of Rachel Aaron, this other author who I've had on the show, actually, but who wrote this blog post and an ebook called 2K to 10K, which is about how she went from writing 2,000 words a day to 10,000 words a day, and she's also a plotter.
Right.
And she mentioned how she would, and then one of her key things of how to write faster was actually to be excited about the chapter, about everything that she was writing. But
yeah.
Well,
and that's again, like we talked. I think we were talking about like fluff and like not adding just like miscellaneous stuff for the sake of that. I am one of those people where I like, and especially this has happened with book 3, which is kind of why it's taken a bit long. I ended up deleting 75,000 words from this manuscript already. Simply because, not because it wasn't relevant, but because I moved it to book 4, some of it to book 4, but some of it, probably around 30 to 40,000, just wasn't like, this isn't for this book, is kind of like where my brain was at, where I'm like, you know what, this is for a future book, because I do have plans to make it a little Mafia verse, kind of like what the Marvel verse has done, where like you have the main Avenger movies, but then you have like little spin-offs that are just either like one out, like Iron Man that has like 3 books, or Black Panther that was like 1 movie, right? And like, so I have kind of plans for that, and I'm like, this is material for other books. Like, it's good stuff. You'll see it elsewhere, but it's not for this book. And that's because like I just have that standard in my head of like, I know the pace I want to have for this book. I know I want it to go 1,000,000 miles an hour, and if it's not going 1,000,000 miles an hour, it's not going in this book. But my husband thinks I'm nuts, because one minute I'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm so close to finishing. I have 10 chapters left. And then he'll be like, oh, how many more do you have left? Thinking I'm going to say like 5 or 3. And I'll be like, oh, I have 15 chapters left. And he's like, whoa, what happened? What happened?
Lost some weight back there. Yeah.
Yeah, we lost some weight. We did some trimming. Yeah. But you know, this is the beauty of writing, right? Like it's your creative mindset. I could easily write, I think someone asked me one time, and I've been monitoring it ever since. I write between 4,000 to 6,000 words a day. I just don't keep 4,000 to 6,000 words a day. So sometimes like I'll write it and I'll be like, this was good. Or you know what, I'm sure you know this feeling too. I said 4 sentences when I could have said 2. And so I will edit it down a little bit. And so I write between 4,000 to 6,000 words a day. And I've written like 12,000 words. And one time I think I wrote 27,000 words in a weekend.
Wow.
That's
like better than I've ever done, I think.
Like a Friday to Sunday. Oh, it was awful, Tim, because I barely slept. He brought me food and then had to remind me like, hey, you should probably go take a shower. Like, not saying like, like you're like you need one, but also just like you as a person who like, I take like 2 to 3 showers a day because I'm a weirdo. He's like, you just need like a reset. Yes, you need like a reset. And sometimes like I need that just, all right, I need to step away. But when I'm in writing mode, I am in writing mode. You cannot interrupt me. I've probably listened to the same song on repeat 30 times. So I ended up getting a pair of headphones because he didn't want to listen to Ed Sheeran's Bad Habits anymore.
The long-suffering spouse. Not anymore though, because now he doesn't have to listen to the same song over and over.
I did have my editor with book 2. I sent her. I was really crunching on like the last 5 chapters, and one of them was one of my difficult chapters. And it wasn't that I didn't want to write it. It was that it was like an action chapter. Like there was a fight scene happening. And for me, it's like a person who's in theater that's like blocking the scene. So I'm like, and then Jackson moves here, and then Ethan moves here, and then there's like, so I have to plan all that out. And I'm like, I just don't want to do it. And I put on Ed Sheeran's Bad Habits, and I was cruising, and I was listening to it, and I was writing, and I'm writing, and my husband comes in, and he's like, change the song. He's like, it's been 3 hours of Bad Habits, and I can't listen to it anymore.
No, that's a really bad habit.
And like for me, I didn't even realize that I had listened to it for 3 hours straight.
Yeah.
And my editor, when she edited that chapter, she goes, yeah, I could tell that like you were really cruising through like, chapter 37, whatever it was. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, why don't we pull it up? And she pulls up like a chapter 36 and a chapter 38 and then shows it with chapter 37. And it was just like error. Like the whole page was red. And I was just like, yeah, I promise I was just over caffeinated and like, this is all happening at once. So, yeah. I can get a bit spazzy.
No, that's completely understandable. And I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, you mentioned ADD, and I'm like, yeah, with ADHD, a little caffeine can go a long way. I know that from experience.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I don't have that one, but I do have the 27 tabs open at once. So that's me.
Yes. But there's so much there that I want to talk about, but partially about just because I always associated writing fast with my enjoying myself, and I think that's probably true here. But also, but what about the weekend where you wrote 27,000 words? Like that sounds really. And actually, I think I've done 24,000 words in 2 days before.
It's only when I say that it was awful, I mean just like my body hurt afterwards.
Oh no, I understand.
Yeah, like sitting in that position and just typing, and like my brain is thinking about 27 tabs open all at once. Of like, oh, you could tie that in, you could set up for that next scene that you've already written, and like that's how it's going. So like mentally I was exhausted in my body, but I was like loving what I was writing and I didn't want to stop. But Mom was like, do I get to see you? And I get that way when I'm editing too. Like when the manuscript is done, like with rough draft, and I've sent it to the editor, and now I'm going through and I'm doing her changes and beautifying it up. And I did like a TikTok one time that was that scene from Schitt's Creek where they're like, we couldn't find you, and like I texted Alexis, and yeah, like the whole family was texting me like, are you alive? Are you okay? Like we haven't heard from you. And I was like, yeah, I'm just in an editing crunch. And, my mom at one point was like, do you want to go get your nails done? And like, I did, Tim. I really wanted to go get my nails done, but nothing could pry me from my cold, dead keyboard. So
I imagine it was it was probably getting a little bit hot moving so fast there. But yeah,
it was.
Definitely when writing rough draft, I'm going back to dictation because that means I can stand up while I'm doing it, and I don't have to get as much.
That's amazing. I am so impressed that you can do dictation.
I haven't done a ton of it yet as far as coming back to it this year, but I mean, my best week was like 60,000 words in 1 week, and I did it again a week later to make a 120,000 word novel or so. Yeah, and that's a really incredible feeling. I really do want to do that pretty much. I want to make that my regular schedule, right? Dictate 60 to 80,000 words a week, because then I can actually have enough books out, because I don't write stuff that's taking off yet. And I really want to get more shots at that,
Right. No, I totally get that. And do you do Kindle Novella? Have you looked at that
Kindle
at all?
Vella. Yeah, I've used Kindle Vella. That's where I serialize my work, and it makes and it's made me more money than my Kindle ebooks.
I've had people ask me that, and I think that they're asking because they don't want to wait any longer, and they know that.
Oh, how naive of them!
Well, and they know that I have like chapters 1 through 20 of book 3 already like done and edited. Oh, so okay. Like I could publish it. So I know they're like, do you ever think about Kindle Vella? And I always say no, because Kindle Vella would be dangerous for me, because I do go on those little rabbit holes sometimes, those little rabbit trails, and I wouldn't want to do that with Kindle Vella. I feel like that would be like way too much freedom for my ADD brain.
Yeah, no, it is wild. I mean, I've done 10 serials on Kindle Vella now.
Wow, that's so awesome.
Most of them aren't complete. In fact, they're all kind of technically ongoing. One of them is a complete novella worth of story, and there's a few, and the others are more or less short stories. But there is so much to do there, and I kind of gave up on updating those regularly right now, because it's just I can't. Because most of them were ongoing stories. None of them were like, I have a lot of words in the can.
Right.
And so I just can't do 10 at once. So I'm trying to figure out which ones I want to continue first, and I'll finish them all as time allows.
Did you ever struggle with like where you wanted to publish something, like, because sometimes they're like, I know like with Kindle, if you publish it with them and then you do like their marketing, you can't publish it anywhere else.
Well, that's just for a 90-day period, though.
Yeah.
So I mostly do Kindle Unlimited, but also because I can do the print books, the print-on-demand books now, you can publish them basically through all the other sites, because that's only the ebook. So I'm pretty happy with that setup right now. Because
that's cool.
because people being able to read the book for free gets a lot more people in the door.
Yeah.
Or read it with their subscription, rather. And that's really nice. So... But I'm also doing all the books through Kindle Vella now, practically. I mean, I'm going to probably publish like this one big science fiction young adult novel that I wrote when I was a kid. I'm going to be publishing that on Kindle Vella.
That has to be so exciting for you, like,
away.
when you're reading it. Like, does it kind of bring back those nostalgic memories of like when you were writing when you were 17?
A bit, yeah. Though I was such a miserable teenager. That it's kind of it's a tricky one to think about, because I don't have that much nostalgia from those days, to be honest. Mostly it's kind of, and I mean, it's not necessarily even the fault of being in high school or any of that stuff, though. I'm sure hormones don't help with that kind of thing, but it's a weird story, because I just started taking one of these these medications that really helped me.
That's awesome.
The month before I started writing this book.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and thank you. And it changed a lot. Like, I finally started making friends in school and stuff. Like, I hadn't been able to do that before. Right. It was a wildly different year, my senior year of high school. I
understand. Yeah. That was me from like 8th grade to 9th grade, because I transferred from like a private religious school that was really small to a really big public high school. And I do remember that, like, the first half, like the end of 8th grade to like the first half of like my freshman year, I did a lot of writing because I just was so like just unhappy like at school, and like I would come home and like I didn't want to do anything or go anywhere. I just wanted to sit and write. So I totally get what you're saying, that like, you know, it brought you happiness and it gave you like that escapism that we love. But not necessarily always the best memories associated with it.
Right.
So,
I mean, that book's a little interesting, because there's certain parts of that book that I really do love. There's this one fight scene in the middle that I'm like, that I had actually skipped forward and wrote that before, and then I caught up with it. Like a little bit like you talked about. Yeah.
Yep. I love hearing someone else do that too, because I'm like, I don't know if this works for everybody, but it works for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just be like driving in my car and I'll see a scene like based on whatever music's playing, and I'll have to go home and write that scene. And, you know, even when I was writing Catalyst and I had like one specific scene for Ignite in my head the longest time, I wouldn't allow myself to actually write the scene, but I went home and I wrote like the general plot for it, so I didn't forget it.
Oh, nice. Actually, the music, it really it happened to me. I think the most critical to any of my book processes any song has been was definitely 10 Liars. My novel 10 Liars.
Nice.
Was inspired mostly by this one Periphery song called Priestess, because I've been knocking around the idea about people who could conjure firearms and stuff as magical powers.
Nice.
For a while, and then I'm like, but the main character, who's my main character going to be, and what's this world going to be like, and all this stuff. And I'd been doing the 10 ideas a day thing.
Yep.
For about 6 months. So I'd write 10 ideas in a notebook every day. And
awesome.
Most of those ended up in this novel, which is why it's one of my biggest ones. Thank you. And I think it's a really cool idea, and it's really helpful. But I was so silly, and this is just how I am. I remember I was on a flight to Los Angeles, so it was a fairly short flight from here. But I wrote. Oh no! I was. But I think I was actually flying out of Pennsylvania. Anyway, long story short. Is a little bit longer than I thought. But I was writing my 10 ideas that day, and I remember writing very distinctly, I was coming up with different fictional kinds of geography, like geographic features. Like, you know, there's in the real world, we have cliffs and bogs and stuff like that. Well, I came up with 10 of those, but none of them that actually exist. And most of them ended up in this setting in some way or form. And it's just so weird. It's like, and that's what people always say about that book. It's like, it's weird, but it's wonderful. And I love that. I mean, it's a great... And incidentally, it was also the first book I ever serialized. But yeah.
That's also like the beauty of science fiction, too. Or like, I've heard people talk about like science fiction, so like space kind of stuff, as well as like magic stuff, where there's a freedom to it, but it's also like a pressure to it too. Like there's a freedom to like, I need to explain how something happens. So, you know, like you see it with like, I guess a good example would be like the Omegaverse, like where you have like these werewolves and then they have like a fated partner. And so instead of like showing that like they fall in love and like the process of like them falling in love and falling for each other that you would get in like a TV show of like 20 episodes and, you know, they don't kiss until episode 17 or whatever. Like in this werewolf world, like your fated partner, like you're just immediately in love with that person. And it's chemical. It's like a fated, you know, like that's your mate kind of thing. And so there's like a freedom to like be able to explain things that, you know, like I've heard different authors on different podcasts talk about how like, yeah, I had fun. You know, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do here. So I just made up some magic spell that like kind of put the the Band-Aid over the bullet wound. And, you know, it was just fun. But at the same time, there's like pressure there because you don't want to do that too often where you lose your readers because they need to have that sense of uniformity and some sense of logic in the world. Like, even though it's a space world or it's, you know, a magic world, like they need to be able to cling to something.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I try to do my story to be rigorous about what works and what doesn't in my story worlds because I do mostly write fantasy and a little bit of science fiction now. So I really do. I just personally go for as weird as possible because that's what I like. You know, in some ways. I mean, it's not as weird as possible. Let me correct that. There's a lot of features in there that other people just don't expect because I don't know. That's just how my mind works. I've been coming up with weird ideas for a long time. I mean, since I was like 6, before I ever wrote a book, before I ever wrote a word, really. I was coming up with ideas. Yeah.
I found a binder that I had all my old stories in because I had this friend in like 8th grade that she also was kind of like very much like me, like, you know, was a writer. And so what we would do is we each had like a story in mind and we would go home and for the weekend, we would spend the whole weekend writing one chapter. And then on Monday we would exchange those chapters. And that was like our cool weekend plans. And I don't know, like I've kind of always had that like love in there. And, you know, I'm a daydreamer. Like and I love fantasy and I love that kind of stuff too. So, you know, it's the creative side that for a while, I'm like, I'll never be successful, you know, as a creative because I am so type A and, you know, I am a plotter and I'm a planner and I'm all that stuff. And I'll never be successful as a creative. And then suddenly there's like, you know, this little voice in my head that's like, girl, like, what, did you forget about me? Like, left to right, what are you doing?
Yeah, I've been here all along. Yeah.
Right. Right. So, yeah, no, it's beautiful, you know, and I've talked about it with my husband, too, and with other people. Like, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm where I'm at doing what I should be doing. And, like, for so long, I tried to, like, you know, make myself into a career instead of, like, finding a career because, like, I knew I wasn't going to be passionate about any of this stuff, but, like, I'm an adult. I have to make money. I have to support myself. I have to pay my bills. So, you know, and I'm a person who wants to be happy. So I'm like, I'll fall in love with, you know, being an assistant manager at American Eagle. I'll find a way to love that job. And, you know, I love people and, you know, I've tried to make the best of it. But I always felt like I was basically like kind of living someone else's life until like I really pursued being a writer like full time. And then I was like, this is what I was meant to do. Like, regardless of whether or not it's successful. And I hope it is. I hope it's widely successful. And, you know, it's the next Harry Potter, you know, the next Tolkien. I mean, not that I could ever compare to those, but that's the goal that I have in my head of like,
right,
I hope
sky's
it
the
is.
limit. Yeah.
Right. I hope it is. And I'm not going to put a cap on it. But at the same time, like, if I don't sell another book, like, I'm doing what I love to do. And I will leave this world knowing that at some point in my life, I did what I love to do. And that's just beautiful to me.
It certainly is. And you put it into words very well. So, Nicole Fanning, it's been awesome talking to you. But
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been awesome. We got another one done. It's awesome. I mean, thank you so much for coming on. It's always great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always so much fun to be here, Tim. Sorry that I talk too much.
Oh no, it's fine. I'm glad. Whenever people talk a lot, it's great. I mean, I feel like I talk too much on some of these episodes, so take that.
No,
it's worth.
No, I love coming. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Where can people find your work? I mean, I think by now
Yep.
This is old hat, so yeah.
Yeah, so I'm on Amazon and Kindle. And if you are a Kindle Unlimited member, the work is free. So I'm on both, and I hope you find and enjoy.
That's Catalyst and Ignite. Yeah,
Catalyst
check them
and
out.
Ignite, and Flashpoint comes out this fall.
Excellent. Thank you so much once again, Nicole. This was awesome. And as for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellularpublications.com, and you can find my books on timniederwriter.com/books. It's got the whole big list, all the covers up there. I think there's 13 or 14 novels and some novellas sprinkled in there. So take a look. You'll find something you like, I think. But like I said,
Absolutely.
I write weird stuff. So if you don't find it, whatever. Try again. Let's see what's behind door number 1. I recommend Demon Scroll for starters because it's pretty good, and it's more accessible maybe than some of my other fantasy as a tradition. It's got some more traditional fantasy tropes in it. Not like in the bad way though. All right. Anyway, thanks for listening,
it's
people.
Very good.
Exactly. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good weekend. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you again soon.
That tears it.